right, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us this week. My name is Rebecca P. Seimer. I'm the Curator of Collections here at the East Tennessee Historical Society. Today, the Zoom through East Tennessee will be hosted by Blount Mansion's Executive Director, David Hearnes, and Director of Marketing and Public Relations, Michael Jordan. So David has his history and historic preservation degrees from Southeast and Missouri State University. He has been with Blount Mansion since January 2014 and has served as Executive Director since June 2015. Michael has served as a news anchor and freelance war correspondent who has reported from major hotspots around the world. He's earned his master's degree in public history and worked with the Coastal Heritage Society in Savannah as public relations director for 5 years. He has produced more than 30 documentary films and authored 3 books. Michael has been with the Blount Mansion Association since 2018. So today they're going to be taking us inside one of downtown Knoxville's oldest and yet least visited historic structures, the Craighead-Jackson House. It is located at the corner of State Street and Hill Avenue and was purchased by the City of Knoxville and the State of Tennessee for the Blount Mansion Association. After restoration in the 60s, the building has served the association in many ways. It was once the visitor center, offices, and archival storage facility. So this visit will allow us to see a sneak peek inside the home and visit the Colonial Revival Garden, which are both being restored thanks to a $75,000 grant from the Boyd Foundation that will rehabilitate the house and make it once again part of the day-to-day operations for the Blount Mansion Association. So if you're interested in visiting or learning more about Blount Mansion, please visit their website. And if you have any questions for David or Michael during the program, just use our chat feature at the bottom of the screen on Zoom and then the comment section on Facebook. And we will be doing a Q&A at the end led by Stephanie Henry. So a big thank you this week to our hosts for this week's program. We're really excited to see the home and can't wait to see it. So at this time, I will turn it over to David.
Hello, everybody. We're very excited for y'all to join us today. It's a little different giving a talk through Zoom, so hopefully we can make it interesting and make it worth your time. So we'll be taking a look around here in just a few minutes and talking a little bit about what we're getting up to. But I believe Michael's going to say hello and start off with some information about some background about the house.
We do appreciate you joining us today. The Craighead-Jackson House is much more than meets the eye. As you've heard in the introduction, it's one of the oldest homes on its original location in downtown Knoxville, dating to 1818. But what you see is the result of years of work by the Blount Mansion Association and fundraising and lots of love and lots of creativity over the years. And as Rebecca said, we very recently received a $75,000 grant from the Boyd Foundation, which is the nonprofit that Randy and Jenny Boyd and their sons and daughter-in-law operate. That's going to allow us to rehabilitate the house, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I kind of wanted to rewind and just tell you some things that I've learned that really surprised me that a lot of people don't know about this house. The picture on the left kind of gives you an understanding of just what a historical oasis the whole Blount Mansion campus is, tucked into the urban canyon of downtown Knoxville. Looking from above, you can see that our little pocket of green is sandwiched in between the bank towers and the Andrew Johnson Hotel and Nayland Drive. Craighead-Jackson House is on the right, Blount Mansion on the left. Here's what it looks like from street view. So it really forms one historic campus. The lots are not really historically associated with each other, although William Blount did own the lot that Craighead-Jackson House is located on briefly. The stories are separate, but the story of Craighead-Jackson House is intimately bound up in the modern story of Blount Mansion. Here's an 1871 bird's eye view. And if you look just to the right of the Craighead-Jackson House, here where my mouse pointer is, we believe that this small structure in the back of the lot was probably a remaining slave cabin that's been torn down. Now, we're not going to hit you up with too many dates and too many facts. You don't need to remember this, but it is instructive to see who owned the house and why it has the name it does. The first residents, the builders of the house, were the Craighead family. They were staunch Presbyterians from North Carolina, family of Revolutionary War veterans. They lived in the house for 37 years. They were important in their day, but the house is not historically significant because of them. Mayor Swan owned the house for a year, possibly as an investment. For the next 29 years, starting in 1856, it belonged to a physician, Dr. George Jackson, and his family. And we know that Dr. Jackson was involved in creating the first waterworks in Knoxville, but again, no significance to the house based on their inhabitation. A real estate investor named Samuel Thacker Atkins owned the house for another one-year period. And then the Eblee family, and this is a very well-heeled Swiss, German-speaking Swiss immigrant family, occupied the house for the next 36 years. You might ask why it's not called the Craighead-Jackson Eblee house, and we really don't have a good answer for that. From 1922 to 1957, the house went into a rental period where it really saw some decay, and I'll show you some photos of the way that it changed over those years. And in 1957, it passed to the Blount Mansion Association, and we did a massive restoration for 3 years between 1963 and 1966. This is the oldest extant photograph of the house. And you can see it's changed a little bit from its original form. You've got a front porch and a balcony above that. But note the changes as we go through time here. This is early 20th century. By 1930, another door has been added here on the left-hand side. This facilitates entrance to apartments. The home was originally cut into 3 different apartments, and over time, some businesses were added too. You can see it's still the original unpainted brick. Eventually, the shutters come off. Maybe they didn't feel like fixing them, and that leaves an ugly scar, so the easiest way to cover up your scar is to paint or whitewash the outside of the house. This is a 1962 photograph of the house, and you can see that extra door is still here on the left. And we've also got businesses added on, a couple of different businesses, eventually a welding shop. So you just kind of have this stair-stepped, rambling series of additions that are put on the back by the time Blount Mansion assumes control. And at this point in time, our organization's board minutes indicate that we just referred to the house as the White House across the street. So it doesn't get the name Craighead-Jackson House until around 1957, and we don't really know why our forebears chose to call it that. But that's what it's been known as ever since. So you can see clearly the association had a lot of work to do, had the work cut out for them to restore the house. The thing that really gets the ball rolling to save the Craighead-Jackson House is the Blount Park Association's Pioneer Park Plan. So this is a separate nonprofit that existed for a few years. The idea was to create a kind of a colonial Williamsburg-style historic campus. This is before Neyland Drive had been put in place, and the idea was to use the Craighead-Jackson House and Blount Mansion, and a structure here that you see on the left-hand side that's listed as Chisholm Tavern as the anchors of this historic park. And we know, looking back with obvious clues in the historical record, that's not the actual Chisholm Tavern, the famous Chisholm Tavern that was the place where the legislature may have met for a while, where exiled French kings and lots of famous patriots met and did the business of starting a new state. It's this structure. It's another late 18th, early 19th century tavern that somehow in the early 20th century got mistaken for Chisholm Tavern. It was labeled as such and photographed as such by the federal government during the Roosevelt years, but it was to be the linchpin of this new, along with Blount Mansion, of this new Pioneer Park. The plan fell through because of urban renewal, lack of fundraising. Eventually, part of the faux Chisholm Tavern, if you will, was moved, but it was eventually torn down and the interior woodwork went into storage. So when the Blount Mansion Association got involved, they wanted to use some of those elements of the now vanished faux Chisholm Tavern, if you will. This lady, Eleanor Keener, Bruce Keener's wife, spearheaded the effort, and she left us a wonderful 48-page document full of verve, very sassy, very voicey, where she tells of the travails of what it was like to try to save this historic structure on the fly. Now, the Blount Mansion Association has existed since 1925, so by 1957, when we acquired this house, we've got 3 decades of experience. But the Craighead-Jackson House was very challenging because it had been so gutted. And Mrs. Keener and her associates had to move the stairway about 3 feet to move it back, the interior stairway, back to where it had been. They had to remove walls. They had to remove doors and windows that had been cut into it and replace those. And I'll tell you about that in a second. This is the house in 1966, immediately after restoration. And you can kind of see traces of the new brick. They had to match the then 150-year-old brick They found these, I believe it was in Virginia, but even with brick that matched, they needed it to age. And so Ms. Keener writes in her report that they washed the entire exterior of the house in liquid cow manure. And that managed to age the old bricks, the new bricks, so they blended in with the old. Restored all of the shutters on the outside. The one thing that's missing is a porch that we know existed based on Sanborn maps and early photos. So consulting with some of the leading thinkers in historic preservation in the 1960s, they rebuilt the porch. And it's just a wonderful addition to the back of the house. This is the porch today. And you can see, ironically, it has a great view of a mural of the faux Chisholm Tavern, which was not Chisholm Tavern, but it's appropriate that it looks down on Craighead-Jackson House because so many of its elements were used in the reconstruction. And a great view of the river. And we can only imagine with great regret how wonderful it would be to walk down to the riverfront, but can't do that anymore because of Neyland Drive. So much was missing that entire elements had to be brought in from other structures. This wonderful, massive door lock, 18th century door lock, came from a store in New York City that specialized in the salvage and resale of elements from homes in New York City that were torn down during urban renewal. So a lot of the hardware on the doors, the hardware on the shutters outside, some of the doors themselves actually came from other structures. And this is the immediate aftermath of that restoration effort. And if you look, the wainscoting along the wall, that came from the building that was known as Chisholm Tavern. And the mantles came from another historic structure. So what you really have here is a conjectural reconstruction based on the best understanding of what the Craighead-Jackson House looked like, amalgamating all these elements from other old historic structures. And you see all this great furniture and artwork inside. One of the key impetuses for restoring the mansion and a lot of the fundraising that happened was because of the interest in getting the Buck Toms collection on exhibit. Buck Toms was a collector of furniture and silver and artwork from the 18th and 17th centuries. And he passed away in the 1950s, and people really wanted to be able to come see his collection in person. So the Blount Mansion Association partnered with the Buck Toms Foundation and used the house as a place to exhibit these things. And that went swimmingly for the better part of a decade until 1975. A couple of gentlemen toured the mansion on a Friday, liked it so much that they toured it a second time and took very good notes. We shut down for the weekend. We were only open Monday through Friday at that time. And the Craighead-Jackson House was the visitor center for Blount Mansion and also the place where you could see the Buck Toms collection. These two guys came back, broke into an upstairs window, climbed into the ceiling, and came back down through this hole that they cut in the ceiling here into the room where Buck Tom's silver was exhibited. And they managed to steal $100,000 worth of silver. The FBI was called in, and the long and short of it is the collection wound up moving to Crescent Bend, which is actually operated by Buck Tom's Foundation. So from this point forward, the Craighead-Jackson House was simply exhibit space, office space, and a visitor center for Blount Mansion. Now, if you've been to Blount Mansion, you know that we have incredible colonial revival gardens that are the only public garden in downtown Knoxville. So in the 1960s, we felt it was fitting that we could also put in a colonial revival garden behind the Craighead-Jackson House. The Knoxville Garden Club has been caring for our main garden since 1934. Their associated club, affiliated club, the Garden Study Club, took on the task of creating a garden behind the Craighead-Jackson House. And I love these pictures because it's 1972, but we're still wearing gloves to be dressed up in high heels, and I love the hairdos, especially in the middle picture. They created a simple garden in 1966 and 67, but wanted to do more. And so in 1972, the Garden Study Club engaged Edith Henderson, who was a leading, pioneering female landscape architect. And there were not a lot of women doing this work of putting in fancy gardens in public spaces and house museums. Edith Henderson led the way. She created an elegant, refined, but very simple, understated design for what we call the Edith Henderson Garden at Craighead-Jackson House. It's boxwood hedgerows here in the middle, crabapple, pear, and magnolia trees along the outside. The garden in 1972 was a great success. You can see the boxwoods are very short, the trees are not mature yet, understated, but very graceful and elegant. Fast forward to 2019, and due to some unintentional neglect over a few decades, coupled with Mother Nature taking her course, The southern magnolia trees outgrew the rest of the garden, choked out the rest of the trees, and their roots disrupted all the bricks and the walkways between the hedgerows. So we are currently in the midst of a separate fundraising campaign to restore the garden. This is not going to be part of the Boyd Foundation project, but that will happen soon. Step one was to remove those trees, and we needed City of Knoxville permission because of the size of the trees and the age of the house. Our city code wisely restricts the destruction and removal of trees around historic homes, but in this case, to restore this garden, we were permitted to do it. The stumps were ground, and the best news is those old magnolia trees, which are, again, about 50 years old, have been cut down, and the Wood Turners Guild here in Knox County has volunteered to create some wonderful works from those branches and trunks that we'll be able to auction off to raise money to restore the garden. And one of my favorite is the pointillist William Blount vase on the left there. But if you'll stay tuned, in coming weeks, you'll have opportunities to actually purchase some of these for your own collection. So before we take questions, I'll toss it now to Dave, and I'll join him in a second. And he's going to take you, now that you know the whole story and how we came about the Craighead-Jackson House, he'll take you inside live.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael. That was a great recap of the history of the house. I'm just going to talk a little bit while I let Michael catch up with me so he can be my cameraman. The Craighead-Jackson House is, kind of at the basis of this whole talk, is one of the better kept secrets downtown. You wouldn't believe how many people have come by and wanted to take a tour, have wanted to see it. And anytime since I've been here that we've opened the house, usually on Halloween, for people to see, it brings people to the mansion to see it. So we're very, very excited at getting a chance to do right by the house and to put it back into circulation. It's going to be a fantastic project, and it's also going to be a great. We're also hoping to be able to use it as a teaching tool as well, while we're doing the project, to be able to show people what preservation is in practice. So, in the coming months when we're doing the project, we're hopefully going to be able to have some special videos, some live shots, things like that through our Facebook and our social media, so people can see what we're up to and can maybe learn something from it. The house has been closed to the public pretty much since the visitor center was built in the 90s. And the last person to have an office here for the Blount Mansion Association, I think, was in 2011, maybe. And so the house, when I started in 2014, was really shut up. It was very dirty, didn't smell the best, and was in a pretty rough shape. So in the last 2 years or so, we've put in some work just to be able to do some basic cleaning and maintenance. And we had the first floor ready to go for our Christmas party last year. And so the party actually started over here. And so here's Michael. So let me swing this around 1 second. So basically, you want to take a look at the house? Is that what we want to do?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll let Michael be the cameraman. Forgive me. Okay. So basically, this is the base of the 2 rooms on the first floor. As Michael said, a lot of the woodwork that is in here was taken out of the building that was known as the Chisholm Tavern and was repurposed. The funny thing is, the other half, or a lot of the other material, was in storage at the city and has since just basically disappeared. So somebody may come across it one day and kind of wonder what it was, or it could just be gone. One of the main preservation projects is going to be what to do about the floors, because the floors definitely show their age, and they're kind of contribute to the vibe of the house, but you also need to be able to smooth them out and to be able to protect them. So that's one of the questions that's really still up in the air, is what to do about the floors. The wax job they did on them in the 1960s is clearly gone at this point. So I'm going to come through here. This is the staircase that Michael was talking about. So when Mrs. Skeeter said she moved the staircase, it's this one. And it's got some of the most interesting trim along it. And I believe this came out of the Chisholm Tavern as well. So a lot of the fancier woodwork did. And there was also an existing staircase that went to the basement underneath this one that you can still see the remains of. And so a lot of times, one of the questions that we get more often than not is this the house haunted? It comes up often. Every time you read one of the haunted places of Knoxville, that kind of thing, the Craighead house is almost always in it. And there's several stories that I won't recount now that go along with it, but it comes up a lot on Halloween. And one of the people, like I said, the last person that had an office here told me she clearly heard people running up and down the staircase to the basement, and people laughing and giggling, children giggling in the basement. So, the other room, which was the first picture that Michael showed you, is smaller than the two rooms on the first floor. And when we got the house in the 60s, the last thing that had been in here was actually a tea shop. So the window behind me here was actually the doorway you saw from the outside and was the entrance into the tea shop. So the doorway where Michael's actually filming me from was closed off, and this was a separate retail space that was in it. And so the front had to be closed up and the back window had to be closed up as well, turning this back into a normal room. One of my favorite pieces in the entire house at the moment of our collection is this mirror, this beautiful Burnside maple mirror. It's about sometime after 1814, I believe, and it celebrates one of the battles in the War of 1812.
That's the USS Constitution fighting HMS Guerriere.
There you go. As the naval historian, he will tell you. One thing that's in here that's also a really cool three pieces actually. These three pieces of furniture were donated by the Park family, the descendants of the Park family. They live in Chicago now, but this furniture, according to their family story, was purchased from the family who was living in the Blount mansion in the 1840s, I believe is what they said, 1820s or 1840s, and was in their family up until a couple of years ago. And obviously the Park House being a railroad business now, wasn't a collecting institution, and so it came to us. And so this was purchased from the family living in the Blount mansion in the 1840s.
Want to go upstairs?
Yeah, we can go upstairs. Sure. I'll let you go first, so you're not filming me walking upstairs.
Again, this is the stairwell that was moved.
Yeah.
Forgive my camera movements. My image is reversed, and so I'm struggling to figure out how to move right or left here. As you can see, this incredible woodwork that was brought in from the old Chisholm Tavern, or the perceived Chisholm Tavern. Which room do you want to go in first, Dave?
We can look at it. So,
Okay.
Forgive the mess. It is a storage facility, and we're actually packing up to be able to move everything for the big project coming. And so basically, our institutional archive is kept in this room, and we'll be getting new shelving and everything to make sure that we can get everything up off the floor and care for it properly. But basically, upstairs will be collections, archives, and office space.
And there's the collected knowledge of the Blount Mansion Association in that corner.
A good chunk of it going all the way back to about 1925.
Oh, and actually, we have. You want to show one of those, the old 1930s?
Oh, yeah.
These are the visitor logs for Blount Mansion and Craighead-Jackson House from decades ago.
Yeah. So this is actually fundraising, and so this is money that they were raising to save the Blount Mansion back in the 30s.
So the story of the museum is almost as interesting as the story of the original history to many of us.
So. You know, we have we're pushing our 100th anniversary soon, and you know, being around for 100 years, you collect your own and you make your own history as well. We're the oldest museum in Knoxville. Now, one thing I'll show here, this is how they got into the attic. They used the attic space right here, the attic access, the thieves, excuse me, use the attic access here to get in to what we call the chair room now for obvious reasons. And the hole that you saw in the picture is just above between the fireplace here. So they cut into the hole here, got down and got in and took the silver up and back out, because you can actually still see the alarms on the doors here. The doors were alarmed, but the display cabinets weren't. So if they'd opened these, they would set the alarm off. So pretty straightforward for a late Georgian or a federal style house. 2 rooms on the first floor, 3 rooms on the upstairs. And we're really just looking forward to getting deep into this project. And, as preservationists, it's the kind of things that make our heart go pitter-pat. So we're really excited about the Boyd Foundation giving us the funding to be able to put such an amazing house back into use.
We have a few more minutes. Do you want to take them out on the back porch?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely.
I'll follow you down.
So, just want to make sure we leave time for questions.
This is that amazing door lock.
So just so you can see, FM George had to actually make new keys for us, and they started with a solid block of brass and actually had to match them to the action. So.
And this is probably the best view in downtown Knoxville, anywhere short of the top of the bank tower.
Please ignore all the weeds. It's very, very tough to keep the weeds down when you have so much sunshine, but not too long between the end of this year and next year, this whole garden will be restored. All of the brickwork, irrigation, and all the plants will be redone, and it'll be a beautiful garden once again. But it's just one of the few public gardens in downtown, and we need to maintain our green space. And we're very, very excited about being able to beautify this space once again. It means a lot to us.
And there is a basement too, which is
Terrifying. Yeah, when it's all said and done, we're going to have classroom space, bathrooms, and a warming kitchen in the basement as well. That's at least what the plan is at the moment. So we'll be able to have an extra space to be able to take students to do workshops. People will be able to use it for meetings, be able to use it for events. Basically, just have it as a multi-purpose space.
Yeah, I think we've gone for about 25 minutes, and we don't want to keep folks from asking questions and getting lunch.
Well, we'll go back in where it's cool and we'll answer questions.
Where we can hear better too.
All right. Thank you both so much for that. We do have quite a few questions. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible. The first one that we'll start with is one that was submitted by one of the Zoom followers. What is the most important advice you would offer to historical societies that are anticipating restoration of a 19th century historic structure for furnishings, for presentation of the structure's narrative, etc.?
Fundraise about double what you think you need is always going to be my first advice. Always give way more money than you think you're going to need. Because, for example, anytime that you're going to go into a structure, especially if it's been sitting, especially if it has any kind of problems that you can see, once you get the walls opened up and start dealing with things, there's always going to be hidden things that you're not expecting. And I think probably the best advice that I can give is seek out the experts. One of the things that Blount Mansion has done since 1925 is to always make sure that we're asking the top experts in the field for their opinions on how we should do things. Even in, with the Craighead-Jackson House, we brought in people from Virginia and other places in the United States who really do this stuff on a daily basis, and we're able to give the self-admitted amateurs of the Blount Mansion Association at that time the best advice possible. So never be afraid to ask questions, raise way more money than you think you're going to need, and have fun with it, because it is always a lot of fun.
And to be clear, they raised $56,000 in 1962. That's $450,000 today. So
it'd be about $500,000 just to do what they did. It would cost more nowadays as well. I think you'd probably end up spending maybe $900,000 to do what they did for $400 back then.
Okay. What aspects of the restoration do you both look forward to most personally?
You want to start with that one? What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to the basement rooms. They're just too cluttered. I couldn't get a good picture down there. Can you hold this so I can talk to? Yeah, the basement has got so much character. It's full of clutter right now, of pieces of wood that were taken off of Blount Mansion during a major preservation project. When we clear that out, it's going to be this. It's got a huge fireplace. We think it was like a kitchen, so this massive, almost like a walk-in fireplace. And I can't wait to have students in there for field trips so they can do historical crafts, get their hands on some artifacts that they'll be able to touch, and maybe do some garden projects too. I think I know what Dave is most excited about.
It may actually surprise him. I'm really actually looking forward to the window restoration in some ways, just because there's something really kind of fascinating and tangible with that, because in a lot of ways, windows are the life of a building. And so to see them restored and to see them cared for properly is very exciting. But where my heart really lies is with the gardens. I'm very, very excited about getting to do the garden restoration. It's been something I personally worked on since 2014 when I started, and it's just really a dream come true to see that come back to life. But overall, it's just nice to see the house clean and used and cared for and useful. So that's really what I'm excited about more than anything.
Okay. Are there any facets of historic preservation that are exacerbated by being in an urban environment?
An urban environment. Does the urban environment make anything harder in preservation?
Yes. I mean, you've got pollution, which is always going to be one of them, and it just kind of depends on what we're talking about as far as the urban environment. What kind of urban environment? With Knoxville, there's always pollution, but in some ways, vandalism is always a question. You never know if somebody's going to tear something up, so you've always got to kind of be thoughtful about how you can protect historic resources that somebody might be able to get to. But there's I think the hardest thing about having a historic site in an urban setting is the fact that you have a historic site in kind of out of place. So Blount Mansion is sitting right next to 1990s parking garages and 1920s buildings, and it's just sort of, it doesn't sit in it doesn't have its original vibe. It's worse if it was a farm that's been encroached on, but even here downtown, the Blount Mansion has been here since 1792, and you watch the 20, 30-story buildings come up around it, it just kind of loses its setting. So it's, how do you retain the heart of it when it's sitting in a place that's not like it was when it was built?
Okay. Did the Craighead family own slaves, and is there credible evidence to suggest that the house was part of the Underground Railroad under the ownership of George Jackson?
Yes, the Craigheads did own slaves. To the best of my knowledge, the slaves were the ones who actually threw the bricks that the house was made of. And you can still see fingerprints, and you can actually see evidence of the men who most likely men who made them. And the Craigheads were slave owners. Michael and I have just actually been discussing the Jacksons' involvement in the Underground Railroad, and we're trying to corroborate that. There is stuff to suggest in the history that was recently done for us that there is evidence from the family that they did, but we're just trying to corroborate it.
Okay. The Lost Sea in Monroe County used to be known as Craighead Caverns. Do you know if this is the name associated with any of the original owners of the home?
I don't know. Craighead is a pretty distinctive name. I would say there's a good chance that they could be related.
His history indicates he had a business interest in the Saltpeter Cave, but I don't know if that's the same cave or not.
Very well could be. I don't know. I don't know enough about Lost Sea to be able to say, but Craighead is a very distinctive name, and I do know that we have a lot of genealogy on the Craighead family, and it'd be interesting to see if we can make that connection between them.
All right. I think one last question here. What's the best way for folks to get involved in your current restoration process?
Well, we're always looking for volunteers, and we're always interested in meeting people who love history and are interested in preservation. And so all they would really have to do is just give us a holler. You can get a hold of us through social media. You can email us. Feel free to call us or come by. We love talking to people that love history, especially people that are really passionate about it. So if you're interested and you want to volunteer or just want to learn more about what we're doing, then we'd be thrilled to talk to you about it.
It's bluntmansion.org is our website. And our volunteers get their hands on artifacts and documents and photos, and there's all kinds of cool things that volunteers can do.
Yeah.
It's not just leading tours, although we love to have people to do that too.
Yeah. It's everything from that, from leading tours and dealing with the public, to working in our archives, working in our gardens, working with field trips, working with kids. It's we have a lot of different opportunities.
Okay. Actually, one last question. Will the house be furnished and open for tours after the restoration?
I believe it will be sparsely furnished. There will be furniture in here. I don't know exactly what it will look like when it's said and done, but the hope is to be able to leave the house as flexible as possible. So there will be some furniture in here, and we will be finding ways to show people, especially once it's done. We're really going to want to show it off. So we may have like special days of the week that we'll have it open. Haven't quite figured that out yet, but we really want to be able to do so because, like I said at the beginning, people really want to see the house, and we want to be able to show it to them.
But it's, in addition, it's a wonderful historic space that evokes the period, but is also more flexible than Blount Mansion.
Yes.
So we can do things in here that we would never do inside the mansion because it has to remain in situ and help it, it tells a story by the way things are arranged in it. This is a movable space.
Yeah, so we can do art, we can do music. That's actually what it's set up for right now. We had a couple of gentlemen from Nashville come over and play some music for us to kick off the garden restoration. And then COVID hit and we haven't been able to do it again. So it's a great space for music, and we're really looking forward to being able to show it off in a lot of different ways. So we will definitely find ways for people to see it.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today for this visit to the Craighead-Jackson House. Again, a huge thank you to David and Michael and the Blount Mansion Association for this partnership opportunity. Our next program, as Rebecca said, will take place on Thursday, September the 17th at 1 with Gray Fossil Site. So please see our next e-invite and continue to visit our social media posts for more information. Thank you to everyone and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.